Alrighty. Oh, okay. Hello, everyone. It is I, Naven. It's been a week. A little bit. So, I don't know what happened to me last week. I don't know what was going on with me last week. So, I had I don't know what happened. I don't know if it was a combination of the heat or if it was something to do with my low self-esteem among other things, right? Because I mean, mentally I'm not exactly in the best of places, but anyways, I don't know what was going on, but I was on a borderline crash out. It was crazy. Like for a good solid week and a half, I was on a mental decline that was just bordering on insanity. It was crazy. I seriously thought I was probably going to have an issue with just being able to fucking do anything. I don't know. It was crazy. I got over it, of course, like as these things tend to, like you just kind of bounce back into place. I just don't know what caused it. I don't know if it's like because of the heat wave that we had in where I live, or if it was just because of something else. It could be a factor of a lot of things, right? Like the world's also crazier than usual. Like there's a lot of stupid shit happening. And since that week-long sort of like since that a little, like that little week that if I could talk, since that little week-long sort of I guess you could say it's a bit of a vacation, because I just could not I could not stream. Not because of just the low self-esteem, but I just didn't want to bring that kind of energy to the stream, right? To my content, because I don't know if you noticed, but that entire stream where I just reacted to things, my last video, the fucking pancreas video, that basically was with the Warhammer 40k, sort of like a rant that Pancreas did about why fantasy is better than 40k video, and my reaction to it was not exactly great. And so that entire stream was kind of borderline just like, I don't know what was wrong with me since that stream and for the rest of the week, right? It was just weird. Like there was just something going on, I guess, with me that just I could not tell you. I could not piece together. I could not figure it out. I got better suddenly. It was just weird that it just went like that. Anyways, but yeah. But other news though, like I did, like sit down and think about it for a bit, and I was wondering to myself, hey, you know what? What am I going to do with the channel now? Since, like the whole YouTube TOS thing, since I've been gone, apparently YouTube is changing their TOS to get rid of and counter inauthentic content, or content that they find quote-unquote derivative, right? And as strange as it might sound, I don't think React content is going to be targeted like some React content creators were suspecting. I think the real gist of it is going to be that I think it's mostly to combat AI from what I understand, but the interesting thing about the new TOS is that it could negatively affect some other content creators as well. Like Clippers are currently like questioning if their content is going to work in that new TOS climate, because all they really do is just create snaps of like their favorite streamers among other things. And so there's a lot of debate on what the actual effect that this new TOS change is going to have. If it does end up broadening over to attacking React content, for example, right? I don't mind changing up my content to kind of counteract this issue. Like, it is a gaming channel first and foremost. I don't mind focusing primarily on gaming. it is not that big of a deal. It might actually just give me an excuse just to be more gaming focused. But that is kind of the big announcements with YouTube end of things, and I don't know how that's all going to turn out until they inevitably roll out the TOS changes. I believe that's happening on the 10th, and we'll see where that goes. But, you know, I don't think it's going to broadly affect the React content sphere. And I think it'd be kind of dumb for them to do that. But I could see both angles from it, right? Like, here's my 2 cents on it, right? On one hand, right, the React content is not inherently a bad thing, right? There's both positives and negatives to it. And if you wanted to know what the negatives look like, I mean, just look at what Ethan Klein's been doing recently. I mean, I don't know about what Hassan's group of lackeys are doing, as well as what Hassan himself is doing, but last time I saw him, he was apparently threatening one of his fucking chatters, so that's interesting. But the weird thing about React content, right, is that it has benefits and it has some takeaways, but the biggest benefits by far is that it's like a form of advertisement, right? People want to see, and I can attest to this, you know, like, people want to see other people react and also watch, you know, just consume content that they themselves enjoy. You know, like, I tend to, when I watch a video, want to see other people's reactions of that video. I like to compare and contrast my own reactions versus theirs, see what their takeaways are, you know, kind of gauge where they're coming from, how they, you know, like, what their opinions are, what my opinions are, you know, like, I like React content because I like to engage in seeing, and like, where do I stand versus where they stand, you know, like, what, you know, like, there's a discussion to be had with it, right? And that's also fundamentally how I like to do my React content, is that I don't necessarily go into it thinking that I could, like, add any sort of real critique to anything in particular. What I usually try to do is, like, I know Kip tries to add, like, some type of, like, informational sort of, because Kip, you know, he tries to add, like, more so of, like, how do I put this? He tries to add a bit more knowledge and a more in-depth exploration of the topic, whereas I just like to have a conversation, right? And I like to add to that conversation to an extent. At least I try to, right? You know, like, I'm not perfect. As the Pancreas video can attest, I have a hard time. Like, I can talk in circles if you let me. It's awful, but, you know, like, it is what it is. But, you know, like, you know, on a good day, on a bad day, you know, I just like to talk about nerd shit. And that's ultimately why I like to do React content on the channel to an extent, is that I like to talk about nerd shit. I like to react to content that seems interesting to talk about. And also, people will recommend me things to react to. You know, like, the whole reason why I even wanted to react to Pancreas videos was because someone asked me to react to it. And so that's fundamentally why I've been doing it. And that's why I did it for, like, an entire stream just about. But anyways, so with that said, right, the other factor of why I can understand why people may think React videos might go away is because, I mean, well, let's look at it optically, right? It's the easiest thing you can do, and it's the most easiest thing you can abuse, right? It's a tool like any other, but it's a tool that is both, like, that could be used and abused at people's own leisure. So on one hand, you can react to people's content, and you can just, you know, post it on your channel. It may take away views from that content creator. It may do a few other things, right? You know, like, it's really up in the air as to, like, the intent behind it, because especially if you look at the Ethan Klein situation, you know, Denim, what was it, Frogo? I don't remember. But those particular content creators, they react to things, but they don't do the bare minimum of what a React streamer does, right? They don't actually react to them, from what I understand. They just like to watch it and then not say anything, not contribute anything. They don't do anything. And they don't even recommend people to go check out the channels or nothing. And so they're kind of just taking away eyeballs from the original creator, which is kind of it's a bit of a fucked up thing to do, certainly. And they do it with maliciousness, at least with Ethan is concerned, because he used to be a part of the Hassan committee, right? He used to be a part of that circle, and then after a time, I guess they had a bit of a falling out. At least that's how I remember the whole thing looking, when Ethan was still just known for his weird hot takes back in the day. But yeah, he basically, I feel like he and Hassan used to be working together on some points, and then I guess there was a bit of a falling out, and I could be wrong on this, but then after this bit of a falling out, they've been at each other's throats for like the longest time. And those particular content creators who react to his content do so with malicious intent, because there are reasons, as they quote unquote state, like, I watch the content so that way nobody else has to, and because I don't really care, because I don't want him to actually get any sort of like traction, whatever have you, right? They do it with an intent to be malicious. And I think that is absolutely understandable that he would want to take them to task over that. Now, as far as like most content creators doing that, I don't think most content creators do that. I mean, like, obviously they don't do that. Like Smuckalana doesn't do it, nobody does it. Not Kitsu, like I don't do it. Like I try to add to the conversation. I try to respect the creator. I try to respect their their content, and my intent is to bring more people to their channel as well as to kind of shill for them, right? Because here's the thing about React content, right, is that it has the benefits of being like a form of advertisement. Like people who react to the content, they do it because they like and respect the creator and the content that they create, or because they want to see what the content's about. And if they, and if it's an interesting, like a conversation or discussion, if a video was good, like they'll definitely show them out. And even if they don't, they still do, like, because the whole point of reacting to content is simply to kind of bring more attention to certain creators, as well as to kind of just add towards the discussion, engage with that discussion. It's not necessarily to take away from the content creator. It's never been the intention from Jump Street. I don't like the idea that some people would willingly and abusively just react to content and not contribute anything to the content itself. It definitely isn't a good look for most React content creators because of that. And so naturally, right, I can understand why some people would have an issue with React content creators, the React slopped and the React Andes, so to speak, right? Because it exists in a nebulous area where it's like, yeah, it's not exactly real content creation, you could argue, but it does do a lot of service to get people to check out creators they otherwise never would have if they see someone that they like, or someone who like reacts to content, basically like do it for them, and then it makes you interested in wanting to check them out. Like, here's an example, right? As someone who likes to watch React content myself, I never would have found the Russian Badger if I hadn't react to someone watching Russian Badger content, and I'm like, oh, this guy seems cool, I think I'm gonna go check him out, right? And I did, and so now I watch him whenever he uploads anything, and sometimes I even go and watch some of his streams, and it's honestly, like, he's one of my favorite content creators now, and I watch him when I'm needing a pick-me-up, right? It's an interesting sort of dilemma, right? But yes, for content creator purposes, like the Russian Badger, Maxor, A lot of these content creators put a lot of effort into making these videos really stand out. Like they put an absurd amount of time and effort to make those videos, like pop and flare in the algorithm. And so I can understand if they find that people reacting to their content kind of taking away people and views away from their content, kind of a bit of a weird one. I can understand that. But I would like to preface again that I don't necessarily think that it's done with an intention for maliciousness. I don't think it's done with an intention to, like, literally take away eyeballs. I think that people who react to content just simply want to support those creators in a way that's a little different from just simply like, hey, go check out this creator or whatever, like just randomly in like a gaming video or whatever. But not to harp on the topic too much, I don't think this new YouTube TOS is going to affect the state of React content. And though I can understand some grievances that some creators might have with React content in general, I don't see React content as a net negative. Like as long as you're doing your due diligence as a React content creator, you're actively telling people to go check out the original video, go check out the content creator, leaving links in the description, like I've been doing so recently, like for a good while now. It won't be that big of an issue, right? But otherwise, though, there's been a lot of things that have been going on recently, since I've been gone. One of those things being that apparently gamers have spoken. The EU's petition for Stop Killing Games has reached over like 1,002,000 signatures, and it's crazy to think about. I don't know what to say about that other than that's pretty impressive. And mind you, this initiative was apparently on is at its last death throes. It was looking like it wasn't going to pick up anytime soon. And the only reason why it even picked back up in the first place was because enough content creators started, shilling for people to go and sign the petition. I even thought about doing it myself, but then I realized, oh yeah, that's right, you have to be an EU citizen to really sign that willingly. So of course I couldn't sign it, but it's nice. It's good to see that there was a lot of people who showed up to basically sign the petition. And so now it has some actual leg room to kind of stand on. Gamers have spoken. And here's the thing, right, is that even if, right, that the petition doesn't really go through and that it doesn't actually amount to really anything, the fact that a bunch of gamers got together and said, we're going to sign this petition as a means to kind of put the claim out there that, hey, we want you to actually care about your games. Don't just turn off the games once you're done, kind of getting the most you can out of it. Like actually leave the content for other people to fuck around with. Like it's actually going to do, I imagine, a lot for showing that to companies, especially publishers, right, that there's definitely a audience out there for this, like there's definitely, I wouldn't say an audience, but there's definitely a sect of gamers who absolutely want to play these old games and want to preserve them as much as humanly possible. Because the whole, because game preservation has always been a consistent issue. Like too many games have been left by the wayside. Like companies don't even bring back games and franchises that they have simply because they just either haven't thought of doing it, or because they haven't bothered to, or because they just don't see the money in it, right? So many games have been left by the wayside because of this. And I think it's totally well within a gamer's right to want to essentially bring back an older title. But every time there are attempts to do so, like every time they attempt to do so, the publishers game developers, they tend to clap back and they tend to DMCA takedown, among other things, right? They tend to strike those types of initiatives, and that's always been a big, massive problem. Like, the biggest one I could think of in my mind was the Bloodborne incident, right? Someone had managed to finally get a decent emulation for Bloodborne working for PC, released it to the world. People were already hard at work at modding the damn thing, and then Sony came out of nowhere, swung its big executive dick around, and then decided, we're gonna just shut that down. And so that put a whole kibosh on the whole thing. And that's kind of fucked. Because people have been wanting a Bloodborne release for PC for like the longest fucking time, and they haven't done it. I don't know who's responsible for that. I don't know if it's Miyazaki. I don't know if it's From Software. I don't know if Sony is just, got their dick in their hand or something. I don't know what's going on there. But they're literally just sitting on gold, and I don't know what to fucking say about that other than it's really fucking weirdly petty for Sony to be out here striking down people's attempts to want to play their games in places and areas where the game would obviously have better longevity, and also simply because you haven't bothered to provide them the product from which they are demanding to play on the platform for which they want to play it on. It's a service issue, and here's the biggest problem with piracy, right? It's always a service issue. It's always a matter of service issues. It's never actually a problem of like people just wanting to intentionally and again maliciously take content, take money away from the developers, from the publishers. No, it's always a fucking service issue. And the more these companies want to push for live services, want to push for gamers to be paying more money outside of their initial purchase just to play the fucking game, the more the piracy aspect of it starts to seem more legitimate, right? Even the Axeman's made a video on this shit. And the more, at least, well, he's certainly touched upon it in his Pirate Software video, but the more things tend to go in this direction, where it's just like game companies do not want to preserve their games. They do not want to actually give people the ability to play their games in their own time, in their own ways, without any sort of rhyme or reason for why they don't provide these necessary kind of services. Like, and we're not even asking for a whole lot, right? We're basically just asking, like, hey, like, we just want to be able to play our games, and we don't want you to just fucking just to take that away from us simply because, it's, like, simply because people are just doing whatever the hell they want with it, right? Like, if you're not even, because here's the thing, right? Like, if you're not even going to do anything with the property anyways, why the fuck does it matter to you what other people do with it, right? I mean, here's an example. Star Wars Galaxy shut down after The Old Republic came out, and people have been trying to make servers, among other things, to essentially bring that game back, but all that would take would be a instant DMCA takedown on behalf of whoever, probably LucasArts, or Lucasfilm in this case, to essentially put a kibosh on that project as well. And it's just like, there's people just want to play their games. And if you don't want to continue to host the servers for these games, especially for the most bare minimum amount of people, at least allow people to make their own servers and also to continue to play the game in their own means, right? Let people host their own servers. Let people do their own shit with it, I don't understand why this is such a difficult concept for some game developers, but it really does paint an interesting picture on why so many people don't like game companies. I, in particular, have always hated the AAA side of things, and over the years, it's just gotten scummier as time has gone on. It's getting annoying. Like, a lot of people are playing indie games. Indie content has been thriving as a result of this. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just interesting that they're letting, you know, they're letting shit hit the fan and just letting things get away from them when they could easily be salvaging the situation by making more games, better games, with reasonable time frames and constraints that actually work for developers. And also not give so much of a shit every time someone decides they're going to either mod their games, as long as it's a single player game, right? Or they're going to basically bring back an old title that has not been serviced for like the longest time and essentially, play it within their own means or amongst friends, whatever have you, right? It's not hurting nobody. And all it's really doing is that it's bringing more attention and eyeballs to these older titles. There might even, right, if people are dedicated enough to bring back older titles, there might actually be, right, a reason for it that might warrant a discussion. It's just ridiculous to me that game companies seem to think that it's fine to just content strike everything, just to nuke certain initiatives and in titles simply because they don't want gamers to have fun. It doesn't make any sense. I know that they will make all kinds of excuses, right? They'll say like, "Oh, well, we can't help, provide any type of network security or keep gamers from potentially getting viruses." And it's like, oh no, the horror. People getting viruses for weird downloads? Oh my god. What will we ever do? It's just like, people make their own decisions. They can make their own choices. Everybody's an adult. We're all adults here. You think they haven't thought about that? You think people haven't run that risk? And you think if there was content out there that had malicious malware and spyware in it, you think people wouldn't be talking about it? I'm just saying, right? The excuses that game companies make on, against the idea of piracy or people just wanting to bring, like, dead games back to life is just, it's just simply, oh, piracy issue. The reason why we don't like this is because of a piracy, because of malware, because of we can't regulate this thing. And also there's also things in the game that require, that have third party things and stuff in it that could hold us liable. It's like, that doesn't make any fucking sense and nobody cares. I mean, if that's really the problem, then maybe you should consider putting in your clauses that it doesn't, what happens after the game's release is entirely dependent on the product, and it has nothing to do with future projects. It is what it is. Like, the game as it is, whatever content is in it, is just simply there. And there's nothing that can be changed, nothing that can be done about it, and there's no need to police any of the content because it's being used as intended, right? And if it's not being used as intended and it's being maybe abused by, say, people who have bought the game, who own the product, and are changing and doing with it however the hell they please, then that's no longer a company issue. That's a consumer issue. Why is that such a weird thing to understand? I don't get it. It just doesn't make any sense. But anyways, yeah. The whole pirate software thing is also just as weirdly flummoxing to think about, because when I'm thinking about the whole issue with pirate software, I find that his coverage of it was one thing, right? He's made some pretty interesting statements, we'll say, to put it mildly, about the Stop Killing Games movement. A lot of people attribute his comments as to why it's lost steam near the end part of its lifespan, just near the end of it. And so a lot of people have been leveling all kinds of criticism his way as a result of this, including content creators. And while I can understand, right, that potentially doxing, swatting most certainly, and harassing among other things, against the guy is absolutely inexcusable. It's terrible. I don't know why people feel the need to do this. I don't know why some people feel the need to be the absolute worst, to be just literal scum, and to just do the utmost, the absolute worst possible things to another human being, especially in this current age of the internet. But you know, it is what it is, and people have been doing all kinds of shit against Pirate Software apparently, and Pirate Software certainly doesn't appreciate it. You know, I, for one, do not stand for it. I don't understand why people need to do this, because all it really does is that it makes the people who are for the thing look shittier in comparison, right? This is why we need to filter certain people out of our communities, because they make the rest of us look like fucking idiots, right? This is why I say, right, that the joke about gatekeeping and the stigma around gatekeeping is awful, but to some extent, there needs to be some vetting that needs to be done, because otherwise, bad actors can just come right in and they can just do stupid shit and make everybody else look bad as a result. All right? It happens to everyone. It happens to movements. It happens to fan communities. It happens everywhere. All right? The fact that people do this and that not very many people are willing to call it out or are willing to call a spade for what it is, it's insane to me. It's crazy. It's insane to me. And I do not support any of that kind of shit. And so, as much as I sympathize with Pirate Software, as much as I truly do, as much as I do not condone the swatting, the potential doxing, because I'm sure he's been doxed. I haven't heard too much of anything around that subject, but I'm sure he's been doxed. If he's been swatted, he's probably more than likely been doxed. And the harassment, the death threats, among other things, you know, like, I don't condone any of this shit, and I look very, very low and I look down on the people who do that shit vehemently. It is absolutely pathetic. It is real loser type behavior. Don't do it. It just makes you look like a piece of shit, and it makes the rest of us look bad as a result. It's so stupid. But yeah, that is one thing, right? Him getting harassed, potentially doxxed, swatted, all of these things, they're all awful, right? But then the movement succeeds, you know. He does not want to relent on his comments for whatever reason. I get that. He's got his opinions. Everybody has their own. And everybody seems to be in agreement that Stop Killing Games initiative does seem like it has nothing but good things for the game, for the gaming community, for gamers everywhere. And I definitely agree with this initiative. I wanted to sign in myself. But Pirate Software, though he has not relented on his comments, and though he certainly does not deserve any of the harassment that he has gotten, he has recently came out and stated that, hey, congratulations. I hope that you guys get I hope that the initiative passes and you get the initiative passed and you get the law and legislation that you want, but none of the benefits that it would result. And it's like, that's just petty. Now you're just being petty. Like, again, I was sympathetic all the way up until that point, and now that just is petty. That's just being petty. I'm not going to at all say that it destroys any sort of goodwill that I have for the fact that he's been harassed and swatted, among other things. But it definitely, you know, like, it's just it doesn't look good. And that's kind of the biggest problem with Pirate Software, is that he's doing everything under the sun to make himself look like a tyrant. And I've seen enough internet controversies to know, right, that it's not going to look good for him. Oh, I left the screen on, just sitting for a while. But yeah, I don't. Yeah, I'm just gonna leave it there. The whole Pyro Software situation is sad. Like, I don't know what else to say about that other than he's kind of just doing it to himself at this point. And though I do not condone the actions of a few who have went out of their way to be absolute pieces of shit, I'm, if he continues to talk and behave in this manner, right? Like, as much as I could sympathize and empathize with the guy's struggles, he's basically continuing to add more fuel to this fire. He is consistently painting a target on his back, and I don't know how to help someone who refuses to help themselves. I've been in scenarios like this enough times to where, like, if you're going to be an asshole, don't be surprised if other people have something to say about it. So that's just my 2 cents on that. And I'm just going to leave it there. But yeah, otherwise, and then there's a lot of other things that have been going on, such as like GW, for example. Like I've been playing softball with Games Workshop for a little bit because I have nothing but the utmost respect for Warhammer. I've been getting into Warhammer content and as you can tell on the channel, I've been a fan since Space Marines 2. That's when my true infatuation for the IP initially started, and since then I have been going through deep lore dives. I've been watching Adeptus Ridiculous on occasion. I haven't watched any more Adeptus Ridiculous recently, but I have been going on some deep lore dives about certain influential characters, interesting things about the lore, why certain things are the way that they are in the setting, among other things. Sometimes I get things wrong when I talk about the goddamn setting, like the time when I was saying that I think they call them STCs, but I call them STGs or something like that. I don't remember. Or FTGs, I don't remember. Like, it's a lot of lore. It's a lot of content to consume, and I'm only like almost like a little bit into a year into this thing. So it's a lot. It's a lot, and I'm really enjoying the things that I'm seeing, and I'm very grateful and humbled that the 40K community has been nothing but respectful so far. Like, they've been very tolerant of my ignorance and my idiocy and my blundering, which is nice. Like, I know some other content creators apparently did not have that. Apparently Kip has had issues on that front when it comes to his exploration of the 40K community and 40K content, which is kind of strange to me because I think he's actually a really good person to want to have getting into your IP, into your content sphere. Like, I don't know what it is that rubbed people the wrong way with the guy. Maybe I need to go delve into that. But I think he's only going to bring nothing but value to that community, and I don't understand why some people have a problem with him. That's just my takeaway from it. But, otherwise, people have been respectful to me and so far, and I appreciate that. I'm still just a novice fan. I haven't been doing this for eons like some people in this space have. I don't collect miniatures. I don't have any books. Like, I'm very much just consuming content primarily online, playing Space Marines 2. But the whole reason why I brought up the subject of Warhammer and GW is because apparently, like, while I was away, GW decided at one point, I'm a little bit late to this game, by the way. At one point, they decided to basically go on a banning strike for any type of fan animations, fan creations, whatever have you. It's mostly strictly when it comes to animations of their IP, which is weird to me. Like, there were already elements at play that made people question GW's decisions. Like, apparently they're trying to seem more casual friendly. They have been recently doing more initiatives to bring more casual audiences on board, which that isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it has been rubbing the community the wrong way because they have been essentially, because they're essentially like advertising in a way that kind of erodes some of the charm of it, the grim dark aspect of it, which I don't condone personally myself either. Like as someone who, listen, I'm a former Star Wars fan. I know what it looks like, but yes, if I were to come into a space, right? If I want to be, let me get my thoughts together. As someone who likes a thing, I want to see more of that thing, right? Like if I end up liking Space Marines 2, and I like the vibe of it, I like the grim dark aspect of it, I like how feudalistic it feels, kind of. I like how it all feels like it's a really dystopian-esque fucked up future, and I want to understand how all of that works. The last thing I want is to be exposed to content that paints a different picture than the one that I was given. And so it sets a different expectation, right? It's one of the reasons why people had such a fucking problem with Star Wars when it was, at the hands of Disney, right? Star Wars used to mean something for a lot of people. Like certain characters, certain portrayals, like certain story arcs, they were very significant. They were very important and integral to the setting. Like the reason why people gave so much of a shit about the butchering of Luke Skywalker isn't because, they're all man babies and because of all this stupid shit. No. People cared about the portrayal of Luke Skywalker because the Luke Skywalker that they had in the lore, in the expanded universe content, is such a breadth of difference compared to the one that we got from Disney, and it does not serve to add any real discussion or value to the Star Wars franchise or IP as a whole, and it certainly doesn't do anything to really add anything new to that franchise. Like it doesn't do anything interesting with that sort of like twisting of Luke Skywalker's character that we saw from The Last Jedi. And I feel, and because of this, right, a lot of people were understandably pissed off about this, myself included, because I was right there with a lot of people when they went to go see the films and they got a Luke Skywalker that did not seem like the Luke Skywalker from like several novels, comics, and expanded universe content, among other things, right? Like Luke Skywalker was a hero, Luke Skywalker was a monolith, Luke Skywalker was everything you could ever want from like a would-be farm boy protagonist who basically grows into his own and becomes like the best Jedi to ever live. And his story is emblematic of what I'm sure what George Lucas wanted his character to be and what he wanted his franchise to look like. Like, I feel like with Luke Skywalker, he is the pinnacle of what Star Wars was meant to become, and everything that preceded it and follows and plays into it is all just a sort of like a more interesting way to sort of highlight that we need to get to the point of where Luke is to make the universe of Star Wars, seem whole or fixed, right? I don't know, I'm having a hard time explaining myself. That's another reason why I started the channel, is because I am terrible at explaining myself. But at any event, right? Like, the main reason why I ended up falling out of love with Star Wars is not because of the changes, but because of this, but because of what they did not do with those changes, which is bring more value to the IP. They butchered Luke's character for what? Nothing. No reason. They just did it because they could, because they wanted to prove a point, maybe because they had some specific agenda or story that they wanted to tell, but it's not the story that people wanted to see. And the reason why I bring up Star Wars into this, right, is because similar to Star Wars, I wanted to go into 40K as a new fan, as a new aspiring acolyte into this interesting franchise that people love and adore, because before then I thought it was just a bunch of nerd shit of people liking to collect and paint miniatures, and also with the most complicated lore under the sun. And to be exposed to Space Marines and then Space Marines 2, falling in love with Space Marines 2 so much that it got me interested in the franchise to begin with, on top of how interesting the lore actually is, I start to understand why people like this thing, right? And so it would be really fucking annoying, right, to be a new fan and be exposed to things that do not at all show the charm of what this franchise is about, and to be exposed to things that have literally no reason or sense to be written in the way that it is, or to exist in the capacity that it does, and it doesn't really serve to do anything other than to be like a form of advertisement to the thing at best, right? Misrepresentation of what the content actually is at worst. And so going into the following discussion, I feel like GW is doing themselves a disservice if they're going to try to kind of, put on the kid gloves with their franchise and their IP. It's a dark fantasy sci-fi universe. Well, with a hint of fantasy, right? And I feel like they would be fucking themselves over wholly if they decide to trade that off for something that's more, that's something that's more digestible, that appeals to a wider audience. Because people like this thing because of the tone, because of the sort of like fucked up and darker brutality level aspects of its lore and narrative, as well as the way that characters interact with one another, and especially between factions and other races. People love this setting because of how fucking, absolutist, regressive, and fucked up this universe tends to be. The idea that they would want to take that away to some extent or water it down a little bit for newer audiences is just a stupid fucking idea. Speaking as someone who just got into it, I don't want to see your watered down version of what the content is. I want to see it in its entirety, unapologetically, exactly what the content is at its best and sometimes at its worst, right? I want to be exposed to it wholly, without the bullshit, right? Without the filter. I want to see what this thing is. I want to understand why people love it, and I want to be exposed to the best parts of it without having to deal with the possibility, right, that I could be sold on an idea, a facsimile of what it actually is, and then feel like a fucking idiot when I talk to people about it, right? And completely miss the fucking point. Anyways, I just wanted to get that off my chest. So I've been pretty much, right, been playing Kid Gloves with GW because again, I respect the franchise, I respect the IP, I respect what they've been able to do with it thus far, though people certainly have their criticisms of it. This franchise has survived for the longest time because of the fans, and because there's a lot of creators in this space who love 40K, who love this universe enough to make all kinds of content around this to keep the longevity of this franchise going. And I respect it, right? I respect it completely. So it really does paint an interesting picture when GW decides that it wants to do something that kind of runs counter to this aspect, right? Astartes would not exist under this new sort of like approach to fan creations and fan content, right? We would not have Astartes if GW had its way. And that paints a very interesting picture. We would not have Astartes. And the guy who made Astartes likely would never have been discovered or found by GW without the advent of without the advent and the ability to make that fan animation, to do that project. And it really does throw me for a loop to see GW make this kind of decision. On top of that, right, we've already been seeing signs. A lot of people have been saying that they've been seeing signs of the company going downhill, among other things. Forget the tabletop shit for a second. They've been making decisions based off of weird lore decisions. They've been making sort of weird decisions about oh, let's add women into the Custodes. And then they actually did it, and then people were kind of pissed off about it. And it's that's one thing, right? Having an entire faction of Battle Sisters, that is one thing, by the way. That is cool. That is a nice addition to the lore. It makes sense. It works on every angle. It also helps to to sell the brutality and to also bolster the sort of, zealotry and the sort of despotic nature of the Imperium. It does so much service to the lore, and it does it by making the female faction that they introduced into that setting look fucking baller at the same time. Even their behaviors and actions in terms of combat and approaches to combat are equally just as fucking baller. It's just sick as shit. And then they go and make weird other decisions that don't make any sense. There is an idea, right, in the lore that I have been seeing across the YouTube side of things among other lore enthusiasts, right, that there is a possibility for Space Marines to actually have female Space Marines. It's just that no one really does it because efficiently and effectively it just isn't optimal. And more women tend to die through the process of becoming an Astartes than, actually succeeding to go through that process. It's kind of similar to the Witcher issue of Witchers are usually boys taken at a young age, and then are basically they're mutated and altered to basically become Witchers. And most women do not survive the process. In fact, most women end up dying through the process. So that's why they cultivate and curate specifically boys to go through the process, because they tend to survive more often than not. And so that's why they don't do female Witchers, at least until we get The Witcher 4 to maybe get an explanation as to why Ciri is a Witcher. But that doesn't make any sense. But to not get too sidetracked on this point, there is a potential possibility we could get female Space Marines. And while that seems like a viable thing according to the lore, according to some people, right? I'm personally of the opinion that it's only going to drive a further wedge and also a criticism to GW, to people in general, to this IP. And not even because they might do it in a way that's interesting or that's at least compelling on the surface, right? That might work on paper, right? No, the main reason why it wouldn't work, both as a fan wise and just optically, from a consumer's perspective, from a fan's perspective, right? Potentially even, is simply because it has more than a likely chance of pissing off people simply because it exists. And not because it might be well-meaning, not because they might have thought about it a little bit, they might have added, they might have found ways to make that work. No, it would just piss people off because it would feel like they're pushing an agenda. And that's the part that really, that really gets under people's skin, is that we're at a time right now where any type of content that could have any type of weird random inserts is easily seen as them just pandering. And people are 100%, within their reason and excuses for feeling this way, because we live in an age right now where the companies just want to pander to everyone. All right? I mean, WoW recently released a weird animation short that's god-awful, right? And everyone's had their opinions on it. And the biggest takeaway of it is that it is just such pandering slop, right? They have literally the equivalent of the WoW equivalent of a sort of wokish college student with so close to having butterfly glasses is fucking ridiculous. And also just a black butch lesbian type elf chick. And it's you could not make this more fucking stereotypical if you tried. And so any goodwill that might be behind anything that WoW does is now forever stained by this idea. Because they decided to pander to potentially wokest nonsense, maybe even culture war bullshit, because they played into culture war nonsense it is now in the conversation of culture war nonsense, right? And that's where I want GW to really take into consideration, is that they should definitely consider not doing anything to jeopardize their own IP simply because they want brownie points. And they certainly, right, should not do anything that's going to potentially put unnecessary eyeballs and unnecessary criticism and strain on their IP simply because they want to just make a quick buck, or because they just want to appeal to wider demographics, or whatever have you. You know, like, there's definitely should be a thought process behind it. They already have the Battle Sisters. You know, like, if you really want to appeal to women and want to bring more, you know, like, female demographics to this, you know, to the IP, to that setting, all you really need to do is just make some more stories around the Battle Sisters. Battle Sisters are already pretty gnarly as hell. You know, like, you don't need to do anything else. Just make more stories around the Battle Sisters. And make the characters that you could introduce through the Battle Sisters equally as interesting. All right, I went through an entire fucking pancreas rant about this. Just do it. Just fucking do it. Anyways, we're almost at that hour mark. Technically, we are at that hour mark, but yeah, I'll just kind of leave it at that. I needed to get some of these things off of my chest because the world is getting kind of weird, and I've missed a lot of things in just a span of a week. It is crazy. And as far as my channel is concerned, like, I've realized through that week-long process of me almost going through a crash out that I feel like that I need to kind of maybe, like, I feel like I kind of understand a little bit more of what I want to do with my channel and what I want to do with my content going forward. I think that's what I'm going to do, going forward with my channel, is that I want to make games. Well, not make games, but I want to make more gameplay videos. I want to play games. I want to talk about games. I want to talk about nerd shit. I want to talk about things. And I just want to engage with people in interesting conversation. It's one thing that I took away from the Space Marines Mastercrafted Edition, which some people might debate this. I, in my personal opinion, think that the Space Marines playthrough of the Mastercrafted Edition was my best stream yet. And all I really did was just kind of play softball with the developers about how their game does the bare minimum of being graphically enhanced. Like, it's to call it a remaster is certainly a thing to call it. But Space Marines Mastercrafted Edition, my playthrough of it, my experience with it was kind of meh. But, it was basically more of the same of what I already come to love and enjoy about the first game, just with some slight graphical improvements. I've already touched upon that. I didn't get too hypercritical about it because I just, I don't think the developers who made it are the same developers who actually made the game. And I'm pretty fucking sure Sega's the biggest proponent as to why that game got thrown out the way in the state that it did. Nothing to do with the developers. I'm sure the studio behind the project probably got assigned to it, probably didn't actually want to do it. They were just told by Sega, hey, Space Marines 2 is popular right now. Let's just re-release Space Marines and make a bit of a buck out of it, right? And so they just did the bare minimum to make that game look impressive and then just called it a day. And so I don't really blame the developers too much on that front. Until we know the full story of why that game got released in the state that it's in, I'm not going to start pointing fingers, because I would rather, reserve my criticisms, my vitriol for the people from whom which it concerns. But as far as that story goes, I loved playing through that game for one particular reason. It was because of that one fucking chatter. His name was Valabesh. He literally shows up. I think it's Valabesh? I don't know. But anyways, he literally shows up like early at the earlier points of my stream, and he literally just sits there and he just starts chatting me up, and we're just talking about nerd shit, and I ended up enjoying that experience so fucking much because all I was doing was just talking with him while playing a game, just kind of shooting the shit with the guy, right? And it's become one of my fondest memories and experiences as a result of me, like playing through Space Marines Mastercrafted Edition. And though I didn't really have anything much to say about the game other than like it's just more of the same with slight graphical improvements, like I mostly just played softball with the fucking thing throughout the entire time. I loved talking with that guy. I love talking with Valabesh about Warhammer shit, about nerd shit. And that's all I really wanted, right? Was just to play games, talk about nerd shit, and just go about my day, right? That was the whole purpose of why I started the channel. That's the whole purpose of why I do content in general, content creation. I don't have a whole lot of excuses to talk about nerd shit in my own time, right? I don't have a whole lot of avenues for which to engage in discussion and discourse over just stupid menial shit, just hobbyist shit, right? None of my family is into the things that I'm into. They don't play games. They're not into Warhammer, certainly. They don't collect miniatures, for fuck's sake. And they certainly don't care about the things that I care about. And all of my friends, right? They're into some things, but not all of the things, right? So with this channel, right, I wanted an excuse to basically play games, get better at talking and having conversations, making conversations. That was the original purpose of the channel. But as time goes on, right, back when I was just a disembodied voice on the fucking channel, but like as time goes on, right, I'm discovering more and more that what I really want out of life, out of my experience from this channel is just to talk about shit. It's just to talk about shit, talk about nerd shit, engage in interesting discussions and discourse about video games or any type of geek related things, and just play games. That's all I want. That's premium life long. That's just premium living for me. And that's really all that I ever want from anything that I do, from my channel, from my own life. I just want to have interesting discussions, and I just want to play games. It's all I want. But anyways, enough of that. I've harped and ranted enough as is. So today we're going to be playing Stellar Blade. And what I want to do, and another thing I wanted to kind of touch on a little bit as well is that on the subject before I move on to Stellar Blade, the aspect of me being able to engage in interesting discussion, like I know the easiest thing to do with this would probably be like, hey, maybe I can play games and also like shoot the shits with people who I'm playing games with. In other words, maybe I could collaborate with certain creators. Maybe I could talk with certain creators. Maybe I could do this and that sort of thing, right? Maybe that way it'll expose me to new people, establish new relationships, maybe kind of network a bit, maybe meet new people, kind of, just basically do a bunch of, like a bunch of that kind of shit, right? I could do that, but one of the interesting things that came out of the result of the Cinder controversy, right, was that it put a lot of people on edge, and so now collaborations and things of that nature just aren't really in the cards that much, as of right now, anyways. Which, by the way, is kind of confusing to me. I don't know if I touched on this at all. I know I touched on the Cinder controversy a little bit here and there, mainly just discussing some of the finer details, the standout details that came out of it. But one of the weirdest things that I took away from that was that people were genuinely surprised that Cinder ended up having a crash out. It's like, I mean, I'm not going to say that I at all predicted that she would have a crash out. I'm just saying it's surprising that people were surprised that it happened in the first place. Like, not speaking about particularly Cinder, the bigger you are as an influencer, as a content creator, the more fame you get, the more likely you are to meet people who only care about fame and infamy and only care about themselves, right? You're just going to meet selfish people who are going to prioritize their own personal gain, and it's not And so I'm not that surprised. I've seen enough internet controversies, both in the content creation sphere and onwards, to know that there is a lot of people in these spaces. A lot of people. And so it's weird that people found that so surprising to me. Even just not even inside the VTuber cliques, but also just the VTuber groups in general, but also just like audience wise. It's like I could easily tell you that not all of these content creators are probably what they seem. And me specifically, right, like I never really was that attached to Cinder in the first place. Like I always felt that her content was a little too orchestrated, right? It was a little too, I wouldn't say predictable, I wouldn't say formulaic, but it felt more like contrived. It felt more organized, right? It's not like that's a bad thing, right? You're a big enough content creator, you focus more on structure than anything else. You want to keep things consistent, like for your fans, for your audiences. But it's like, it feels like I wasn't getting much of the personality as much as more so as like the facsimile of it, right? I was getting more so like a proxy than I was the human out of it, out of the experience, which is why I never really took to Cinder's content. And it turns out that there was a reason behind that. So, but I'm not going to touch too much onto this because we're going to move on to this game. But in general, right, I could try to collab with people to play games, and I'm not opposed to it. Where's my controller? But I must be sitting on it. Yep. Kind of sitting on it. Anyways, I'm not opposed to collaborations. I'm just really concerned. I think. Let me see. Did it? No, it did not. Okay. My biggest concern, because I have a bit of a persecution complex and because I'm a little bit more cautious than most people, I don't want to end up meeting and or associating with people, right, who are going to not have my best interests at heart, who are probably just going to use me, who probably don't really care in general, right? Like, because I've seen especially male content creators come and go, and they do not leave with the best of circumstances, right? Like, I don't want to be put on a docky, or I don't want to be called out for some weird shit, right? I don't want to find myself in a position where I have to be actively concerned about my reputational well-being, right? So I'm a bit iffy about that, but otherwise, like, outside of just that, people seem to be doing the same thing, which is kind of healthy to some circumstances, right? But, like, I don't know how that's all going to boil over. Like, I would not mind collaborating with people, but I do not know who I'm going to be associated with. They don't know if they would want to associate with me, and if that's going to be great. Like, people are more cautious now than ever before, and as a result of that, like, I don't want to reach out if and potentially make people uncomfortable among other things, because like, I have my own opinions, I have my own qualms and issues. I also just am a different person from probably they are. Like, I don't want to end up stepping on people's toes. I don't want to say things that might be offensive or rude. Like, I think about a lot of things, a lot of probably useless things. But yeah, in general, let's get that off the screen. I'm just a little bit concerned for myself, and I think everybody else is at the moment, so I'm not going to be actively looking to see if people want to collaborate among other things. I just would rather stay in my own space to a degree, which is fine. It's a bit limiting, but I can work with it.